On January the 18th of 2023, an off-duty police officer intervened to break up an argument involving a group of men in the 1300 block of West 90th Street, Chicago. 3 of them walked away after the female officer had asked them to calm down, but the 4th, Levon Smith, stayed behind and continued talking with her. As the off-duty cop was heading towards an apartment building, Smith grabbed her from behind and tried to disarm her. They both fell to the ground as the struggle unfolded. The officer shouted out, "I'll kill you," before firing 2 shots, and moments later Smith repeatedly said, "You got me." The woman then reiterated her threat and fired a 3rd shot. Smith was struck in the hand and abdomen. Footage of the altercation released by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability showed that the officer had at no point tried to render aid to Smith after shooting him, and instead continued screaming at him. The man was heard telling her, "I'm sorry, I don't want to die." He was taken to the Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn, where he was pronounced dead on January the 20th. While law enforcement deemed that the officer's actions had been appropriate, Smith's estate would accuse her of taking it too far. They alleged she'd used excessive and violent physical force in a lawsuit they launched against the city on February the 3rd. The family pushed for a judgment of $10 million. Number 9. Edward and David King. A father and son from Suffolk, England, were handed life sentences in the spring of 2023 after they'd hunted down and killed a man whom they believed was trying to steal from them. David and Edward King, aged 54 and 18, had spotted Neil Charles casing their neighborhood on CCTV. He was reportedly captured by security cameras trying the doors of luxury cars belonging to the family. In the early hours of June the 20th of 2021, David and Edward went looking for 47-year-old Charles after they'd seen the footage. Edward armed himself with a katana while David brandished a Second World War dagger. The duo confronted Charles, who was stabbed in the chest with the dagger and slashed on his knee with the sword. The attack left him so distressed that he shattered the glass on a neighborhood door as he banged on it for help. Charles, a career criminal with 66 previous convictions, died 2 days later. David and Edward, who reportedly had an obsession with weapons, showed no remorse over the incident during their murder trial, as they claimed to have confronted Charles with the intention of making a citizen's arrest. However, messages on a WhatsApp group suggested that the father and son had been preparing to enact vigilante justice after previous thefts in the neighborhood. David posted the photo of Death Wish anti-hero Paul Kersey on the group in 2019 after the wheels of his BMW M3 had been stolen. Kersey, portrayed by actor Charles Bronson, becomes a vigilante in the movie, killing several muggers who'd been responsible for his daughter's death. Edward echoed his father's thoughts and wrote messages saying that car thieves should be shot and have their private parts cut off prior to being killed. The father and son's efforts to persuade a jury they'd done nothing wrong ultimately failed, and they were convicted of murder by acting in a joint enterprise. The judge argued that there was a degree of pre-planning to the killing, with evidence indicating that the duo had intended to punish Charles with violence. They were given life terms with a minimum of 21 years served for David and 19 for Edward. Number 8. Carolina Isabel Hernandez. On August the 16th of 2022, a teenager was arrested by law enforcement in Paris, Texas, for assaulting a man who'd allegedly stolen her cell phone and social security card. 18-year-old Carolina Isabel Hernandez called the police to report the theft and then told them she was going to attack the suspect. She was tracked down by officers to a nearby gym. They observed Hernandez chasing an unnamed man around the gym while armed with a knife. The man in question would report that the teen had struck him with a metal bar. Hernandez was taken into custody on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and transported to the Lamar County Jail. The outcome of the case regarding the theft of her property remained unclear, according to subsequent information released to the media. Number 7. Carl Townsend. On October the 29th of 2021, Carl Townsend watched on a phone app as a group of men were breaking into his home in Halewood, Liverpool, England. It was suspected that the men were after the 32-year-old stash of illegal substances. Townsend and his younger half-brother Jamie Cunningham went to the home armed with large kitchen knives. Upon arriving at the address, Townsend repeatedly stabbed one of the burglars, identified as 31-year-old Jordan Brophy, who was unarmed. Townsend plunged the blade in the outer edge of Brophy's left eye, cutting his optic nerve and piercing his skull on both sides. The knife strike had been delivered with such force that part of the blade snapped off and became lodged in Brophy's brain. Another piece of the knife broke following a subsequent stab above Brophy's right eyebrow. Townsend then reportedly tried to run Brophy over, but missed and crashed into a garden wall. As the burglar was pinned against a Fiat 500, Townsend stabbed him 3 more times with what had remained of his knife. One of the blows severed Brophy's jugular vein, causing fatal blood loss. Townsend and Cunningham were arrested in the killing's aftermath. The latter was acquitted of murder and manslaughter after it was determined that he'd mainly acted under his half-brother's influence and direction. He was given a community sentence of 2 years supervision with 10 days of rehabilitation activity after pleading guilty to possession of a bladed article. Townsend was cleared of murder as well and instead found guilty of manslaughter. He was given a sentence of 19 years in prison and would have to serve 2/3 of it prior to being eligible for parole. Number 6. Aaron Javan Mitchell. 2 men driving around Seattle in a stolen tow truck targeted a Chevrolet Tahoe on October the 7th of 2022. The driver, 27-year-old Joshua Blackwood, believed that the Tahoe had been abandoned as he'd previously stripped it of its stereo. On the second theft attempt, he tried starting it but then drove off in the tow truck after his unnamed 53-year-old passenger had spotted the SUV's owner, 45-year-old Aaron Javan Mitchell. The latter chased after the thieving duo in a black sedan, and part of the pursuit was captured on surveillance video. The tow truck eventually got stuck on concrete blocks on East 1st Street. Mitchell was suspected of having exited his vehicle armed with a .40 caliber pistol and then shooting into the tow truck's cabin multiple times. Blackwood died at the scene from a gunshot injury to his upper back, while also exhibiting injuries to his head that were consistent with him being pistol whipped. His passenger was shot in the arm but ultimately survived. In the months that followed, Mitchell took extraordinary steps to evade capture. He torched his black sedan and never returned to his apartment, relying on the help of a friend to clear it out. Seattle police eventually tracked him down to his girlfriend's home in Federal Way in late March of 2023 and arrested him. Mitchell was charged with first-degree murder and second-degree attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty during an April hearing, and his trial was scheduled to commence on May the 25th. Number 5. Victor Butler. On November the 15th of 2022 in Indianapolis, 46-year-old Victor Butler pulled up to a gas station on Southeastern Avenue near its intersection with Emerson Avenue in a white Chevrolet Malibu. He went inside the building and moments later, 30-year-old Dustin Phipps arrived at the gas station and got out from the passenger side of a white box truck. Phipps, a man who was reportedly struggling with addiction at the time, entered the Malibu and started backing out of the parking lot. Butler then ran out of the gas station and fired 2 shots into the Malibu's driver window. Phipps slumped over the steering wheel as the vehicle continued rolling through Southeastern Avenue, leaving behind car components in its wake. It came to a halt after running through a fence and crashing headfirst into a tree. Butler fled the scene while Phipps was later pronounced dead in a local hospital. Butler hired an attorney who brokered his surrender to the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. He also gave up the Glock 357 pistol he'd used in the shooting and was formally charged with 1 count of murder. Subsequent reports indicated that the Malibu Phipps had been trying to steal from Butler had already been reported stolen since August, although the specifics of said theft remained unclear. Number 4. Rodney Dove. In September of 2013, David Garcia entered a convenience store owned by 53-year-old Rodney Dove in Corpus Christi, Texas. 39-year-old Garcia initially asked for cigarettes and then tried to leave the store without paying for a 12-pack of beer. Dove brandished a pistol and shot Garcia multiple times. One of the bullets struck the man in the head, killing him. Dove was subsequently arrested on murder charges and held at the Nueces County Jail on a $35,000 bond. Updates on his case indicated that a Nueces County grand jury had decided not to indict him for the fatal shooting. Number 3. David Hillis. 25-year-old Marcus Glover and Terry Tart, aged 37, broke into the home of David Hillis in Akron, Ohio on August the 7th of 2015. Hillis later maintained that the men held him at gunpoint and tried to rob him, while Tart would claim that the trio were in the midst of a drug deal gone wrong. As Glover and Tart fled the home, 21-year-old Hillis grabbed the gun and rushed to his front porch. He fired multiple shots at the other men, striking Glover in the head as he was approximately 70 yards from his property. Glover's dead body was found by the authorities 2 houses from Hillis's home, while Tart escaped into the nearby woods. Later on, the police went to the property and took Hillis into custody for voluntary manslaughter. He pleaded guilty the following year and was given a 6-year sentence, with 1 year in jail and 5 on probation. Tart was eventually arrested and also charged in connection with Glover's killing, as the authorities determined the man wouldn't have died had it not been for the aggravated burglary. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Number 2. Kerry Fear. 39-year-old Kerry Fear from Birmingham, England, was jailed in the spring of 2023 in connection to the killing of a motorbike thief. In May of the previous year, 3 men in a white Tiguan had driven up to her eldest daughter's house in Hartley Road, Kingstanding. One of them kept watch while the other 2 stole a Yamaha motorbike that belonged to the daughter's boyfriend. Fear pulled up to the house as the thieves were fleeing and chased after the motorbike rider in her Ford Focus, reaching speeds of up to 86 miles per hour. She eventually slammed into the rider, who was subsequently identified as 30-year-old Thomas Maguire, a father of 7. The man suffered devastating injuries and friends rushed him to the hospital, where he spent 3 weeks in critical condition before passing away on June the 9th. In the collision's immediate aftermath, Fear abandoned her car with the engine running and fled the scene on foot. Law enforcement ultimately took her into custody on charges of manslaughter. During her trial, Fear claimed that she'd crashed into Maguire accidentally, but the prosecution argued that she'd intended to teach him a lesson, noting that the woman hadn't applied the brakes upon realizing she was gaining speed on the Yamaha. Fear was found guilty and given a 14-year sentence. If you haven't seen our video about when vigilantes go wrong, then be sure to stay tuned right after number 1. Number 1. Antonia Batres. 49-year-old Texas man Troy Odom walked into a Houston Family Dollar store on April the 17th of 2022. He was confronted by 2 employees after he'd reportedly tried to steal motor oil. A female customer recording a video of the heated argument was heard saying of the bottles of oil that was strewn across the floor, "He had that all in his pants. He had a lot of fuel." Odom then walked out of the store and was followed by an employee, 21-year-old Antonia Batres, who had brandished a pistol. Moments later, through the window, Batres was seen assuming a wide stance and firing the weapon. According to a press release from the Houston Police Department, he'd emptied the clip of his legally owned 9mm Glock into Odom as the latter's back was turned to him. The gunshot wounds proved fatal, and Batres was arrested for murder and jailed with his bail set at $75,000. Number 7. Dennis Nickel. In March of 2016, a Chicago man was arrested for using a jammer to illegally suppress cell phone signals on the subway during his commute. 63-year-old Dennis Nickel, whom some media outlets dubbed the Silent Vigilante, worked as a financial analyst at the University of Illinois Hospital. He would later claim that he'd bought the jammer, which blocked cell phone signals in his vicinity, as he'd been desperate for a quieter commute. Nickel was exposed by IT worker Brian Rader, aged 30, who posted a picture of him on Reddit as he was actively using the jammer. Such devices are illegal to buy or use because they can shut off police radios and block emergency calls. They were initially developed by the military to disrupt surrounding communications during negotiations or hostage crises. The photo of Nickel quickly circulated online and caught the attention of law enforcement. Members of the Chicago Police Department, CTA, and the Federal Communications Commission set up an undercover sting operation. On March the 8th of 2016, Nickel was taken into custody on felony charges. According to updates on his case, he'd managed to avoid jail time and was given a deferred sentence after pleading guilty to misdemeanor charges for using an illegal device. Number 6. Nick Cross. A vigilante from Geelong, Australia, was charged with the murder of a 29-year-old woman in December of 2018. Nick Cross was known in the community for starting a vigilante group in 2016 after a group of teenagers had tried to break into his home while he hid inside with his daughter. Others in the community joined his initiative, and Cross claimed at one point to have 260 residents patrolling the streets with him. The group's activities gradually diminished following pressure by the authorities for citizens not to take the law into their own hands. In late 2018, Cross had no fixed address and had reportedly developed an addiction to crystal methamphetamine and heroin. The 31-year-old was arrested along with Todd Darrell Sell and Tracy Menzies, both aged 34, at a house in Sydney's West, where they'd reportedly been staying for less than 24 hours. The trio were taken into custody by police in tactical gear a few days after the charred remains of Madison Parrott had been found at the Geelong Showgrounds on the outskirts of the Victorian town. The 29-year-old woman had been living in a glamping-style tent following the recent breakup of her marriage. The motives and circumstances of her killing remained unclear. Cross was accused of shooting her in the head at a different location, then moving the body to the tent and setting it ablaze. Sell and Menzies were charged with accessory to murder after the fact. A sentence for Cross hasn't been pronounced, but during a hearing at Geelong Magistrates Court, he violently lashed out at the officers present in the courtroom, gave them the middle finger, and claimed that the state's police takes kids. Number 5. Nestora Salgado. In 2013, US woman Nestora Salgado from the Seattle suburb of Renton was arrested and detained in her birth state of Guerrero, Mexico, on criminal charges in connection to her vigilante group. After building a life in Washington, the woman would periodically return to her hometown of Olinala and help those in need. Indigenous communities such as Salgado's were allowed under state law to form their own vigilante groups. The woman, then in her late 30s, and others, sprang into action after a local taxi driver was killed for refusing to pay protection to a drug cartel. The community police of Olinala was founded in response, of which Salgado became a commander. The armed organization patrolled the area and reportedly sought to protect the rights of indigenous inhabitants, as well as to keep them safe from cartel violence and government corruption. Salgado was detained by the army in August of 2013, along with several others in the community police, on charges of kidnapping and organized crime. The main focus was the community police's detainment of 3 teenage girls suspected of dealing cocaine, as well as that of a well-connected town official accused of doing the narcos bidding. Salgado was imprisoned without a trial for 2.5 years, during which she was denied proper access to attorneys or adequate medical care. She eventually went on a hunger strike that brought international attention to her plight. Salgado was released in March of 2016 after a judge considered there was a lack of evidence to support the accusations brought against her. Number 4. Christopher Hughes. On February the 5th of 2021, an Australian woman died after she was struck by a vehicle driven by a vigilante while riding her motorbike in Townsville. 22-year-old fitness enthusiast Jennifer Board, who aspired to become a Queensland police officer, was traveling along Ross River Road. Simultaneously, Christopher Hughes was in pursuit of a stolen Hyundai iX35. The 25-year-old was described as a known vigilante whose sole focus in life, as court documents indicated, was hunting down car thieves. He was driving a Holden Statesman, which was also occupied by his girlfriend and a friend, both of whom were live streaming him chasing down the Hyundai on Facebook. Hughes was allegedly going over 70 miles per hour when he tried to ram into his target car and lost control of the Statesman. The vehicle became airborne and spun into the path of Board's motorcycle in the opposite lane. A devastating collision occurred, resulting in the young woman's death. Hughes, whose license had been suspended or disqualified 10 times since 2012, was charged with her murder in December of 2021, and his case is ongoing. Number 3. Bernard Goetz. Amidst the rising crime rates characteristic of New York City in the 1980s, an incident on a subway train in Manhattan garnered immense media attention and prompted national conversations on the limits of self-defense, vigilantism, and race relations. While riding on the subway on December the 22nd of 1984, Bernard Goetz was approached by Barry Allen, Troy Canty, and Darrell Cabey, all aged 19, and 18-year-old James Ramseur. They surrounded Goetz, blocked his path, and asked for $5. Believing he was about to be robbed, The 37-year-old brandished a revolver and shot each of the teens once. All 4 survived, but KB was left paraplegic and brain damaged as a result of his injuries. Goetz, who initially fled but later surrendered to the authorities, was dubbed the Subway Vigilante. In the high-profile case, he was both praised and vilified in the media and public opinion, as some demanded a conviction for attempted murder, while others regarded him as a symbolic avenger of New Yorkers' frustration with rising crime. Further tension stemmed from the fact that Goetz, the son of German immigrants, was white, while the teens he'd shot were black. An investigation by the Office of the U.S. Attorney determined that the shooting's triggering factor had been fear rather than race. Following several trials, Goetz was acquitted of attempted murder and only charged with carrying an unlicensed firearm, for which he served 8 months of a 1-year sentence. He filed for bankruptcy after KB obtained a civil judgment of $43 million against him. Goetz, who became a public figure in the incident's aftermath and an activist for a tougher stance on crime, unsuccessfully ran for mayor of New York City in 2001. The Subway Vigilante most recently came into public attention in November of 2013. He was arrested for allegedly selling marijuana to an undercover female police officer, but the case was dismissed about a year later. Number 2. Shawna Ford, Jason Eugene Bush, and Albert Gaschiola were members of the vigilante group Minutemen American Defense, or MAD, who carried out a gruesome home invasion in May of 2009. Founded by Ford in 2007, MAD was an anti-illegal immigration group, the members of which patrolled the Arizona-Mexico border. Bush was Ford's second-in-command and reportedly had ties to white supremacist groups, while Gaschiola provided intelligence about drug activities in the area. Ford, then in her early 40s, and her 2 accomplices gained access to the Arivaca home of Raul Flores Jr. by pretending to be acting in official capacity and looking for fugitives. Because of Flores' alleged drug connections, they expected to discover a stash of illegal substances and cash that would help fund the vigilante group. The trio only found inexpensive jewelry, which they took, prior to executing Flores and his daughter at point-blank range. The man's wife, Gina Marie Gonzalez, survived after being shot 3 times. She armed herself with her dying husband's handgun and called 911. While she was on the phone with an operator, Ford, Bush, and Gaschiola returned, and a shootout ensued between them and Gonzalez. Bush was hit in the leg, prompting him and the others to flee. His wound was treated by a fellow MAD member, who would subsequently become a witness for the prosecution. Following their arrests and trials, Ford and Bush were sentenced to death, while Gaschiola was given a sentence of life in prison plus 54 years. Number 1. Phoenix Jones. American man Benjamin Fodor, better known as Phoenix Jones, earned considerable media attention as a real-life superhero. Fodor decided to adopt the Phoenix Jones persona in 2010, when he was in his early 20s after reportedly becoming disillusioned with law enforcement's handling of crime in Seattle. He had extensive martial arts training, on which he relied when intervening to break up various criminal incidents. His mask and costume, which were predominantly black with gold detailing on the chest and eyes, consisted of a dragon skin brand bulletproof vest and stab plating. He patrolled the streets equipped with a stun baton, tear gas or pepper spray, handcuffs, and a first aid kit. From 2011 to 2014, Fodor was a member and de facto leader of the Rain City superhero movement, a group of Seattle residents who, like him, adopted costume superhero personas and patrolled the streets. Some of them included Buster Doe, Green Reaper, Torn, Gemini or Mantis, and Fodor claimed that all of those in the organization were skilled in martial arts. As Phoenix Jones, Fodor successfully intervened and prevented several crimes, including inebriated driving, drug deals, vehicle thefts, and a number of fights. In the process, he was shot, stabbed, and had his nose broken on separate occasions. Public opinions on Jones remained polarized, and some, including Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes, leaned towards identifying him as a misguided vigilante. This perspective became rooted in fact, particularly in light of Fodor's arrests. The first had occurred in October of 2011 when he was taken into custody for investigation of assault after he'd used pepper spray on 4 people to allegedly break up a fight. Those involved claimed that no altercation had occurred and that the masked man had attacked them. He spent 7 hours in jail before posting the $3,800 bail, and the case against him was ultimately dropped. During the proceedings, Phoenix Jones revealed his identity in court and pledged to continue patrolling the streets. His transition from superhero to villain was further solidified in January of 2020 when he was arrested as a suspected drug dealer. He had allegedly tried to sell MDMA to an undercover police officer, and law enforcement also reported that Fodor and an accomplice were in possession of 4 grams of cocaine. Thanks for watching. What name would you choose if you decided to become a crime-stopping masked vigilante? Let us know in the comments section below.